I was working as a manager at a tech startup in Berlin. This was my first week, and I was still getting to know the team. We had our morning stand-up meeting, and I was explaining a new project to about 12 people. I went through the whole thing. Slides, goals, timeline, everything. When I finished, there was just complete silence. Nobody said anything. No one asked questions. No one smiled or nodded. They just stared at me. In my head, I'm thinking, wow, these people hate me. I've already messed up somehow. So what do? I start talking more. I fill the silence. I start cracking jokes, oversharing about my process, basically just rambling to make someone say something back to me. This kept going for like 3 minutes. I was sweating. I genuinely thought I had offended the entire office on day 5. Then my German colleague, Friedrich, walks up to me after the meeting and says, "Great presentation. We're processing it. We'll give you feedback via email." Turns out, silence in German offices doesn't mean rejection. It means people are actually thinking. But I didn't know that yet. So for my next presentation, I did the exact same thing. I finished. The room went quiet, and I started panicking again and filling the gaps with nervous chatter. This time, Friedrich just laughed at me and said, "Americans think silence is an insult, but for us, it's the opposite. If we don't care, we won't even listen long enough to be quiet." That hit me hard. I realized I'd been reading the whole situation wrong. Then there's my friend Marcus, who taught English in Tokyo. He told me that during his first class, he asked his students a question, and nobody raised their hand. He waited maybe 5 seconds, which felt like forever, and then he just answered his own question, because he thought nobody knew the answer. At the end of class, his supervisor pulled him aside and said, "Your students understood the question. They were thinking. You were supposed to wait longer." Apparently, in Japanese schools, silence is part of learning. Teachers ask a question and wait for long stretches. Students are encouraged to think deeply before speaking. American teachers, though, we fill those silences immediately. Another time, Marcus asked his class what they thought about a story they'd just read. Nothing. Silence for 10, 15 seconds. Marcus got uncomfortable and started explaining his own thoughts instead of waiting for theirs. After class, one of his students came up and said, "I had thoughts. I was just organizing them. You started talking before I was ready." Marcus felt terrible. He realized he'd accidentally taught his students that staying quiet meant they weren't allowed to contribute. Then there's the German restaurant story. My friend Sarah was dining in Munich with a local friend named Klaus. The waiter brought their food, set it down, and left without asking, "Is everything okay?" or "How is everything tasting?" Sarah waited about a minute, and then she started getting upset. She was like, "He brought the food and just left. He doesn't care if we like it. This is terrible service." Klaus looked at her confused and said, "But the food is fine. He's just not hovering. Why would we want him watching us eat?" Sarah was used to American servers who check in constantly, ask questions, refill drinks, make conversation. The German approach felt cold to her, but Klaus explained it's actually the opposite of cold. In Germany, the server brings you food and then leaves you alone so you can enjoy your meal and your company. The server assumes you'll call if you need something. Hovering and asking questions all the time is seen as interrupting. These stories all hit the same theme. Americans get uncomfortable with silence. We interpret it as rejection or rudeness or apathy. But in so many cultures around the world, silence means something completely different. And once you understand that, you stop misreading every quiet moment as a personal attack. Let me tell you about my friend David, who worked at a consulting firm in London. David is chatty. He's the kind of guy who thinks silence is a problem that needs fixing immediately. His first big client meeting was with a British executive named Mr. Pembroke. They were discussing a major contract. David gave his pitch, and Mr. Pembroke just sat there. He didn't say anything for like 30 seconds. In David's mind, 30 seconds felt like 30 minutes. So he started talking again. He added more details, extra reasons why they should go with his proposal, little stories about past success. Basically, he wouldn't stop. Mr. Pembroke finally held up his hand and said, "I'm still thinking about what you said the first time. You don't need to sell it again. I heard you." This completely confused David because in American business culture, the person who talks more wins. You fill the space. You dominate the conversation. Silence means someone won or someone lost. But in British business culture, Mr. Pembroke was actually showing respect. He was taking time to actually consider what David had said. He wasn't just ready with a quick response. Here's the thing, though. After that, David learned that quieter doesn't mean slower thinking. Mr. Pembroke just wanted time to process. And when he did talk, his points were sharp and thought out because he'd actually used that silent time. I also knew a girl named Emma who moved to Copenhagen for a job. She was excited about making friends at work. She'd try to start conversations with her co-workers during breaks, asking tons of questions, telling stories, keeping things flowing. Her Danish colleague Per didn't really engage the same way. He'd give short answers. He wouldn't ask her lots of questions back. Emma felt like Per didn't like her. One day she asked him directly. She said, "Do I bother you? You never really talk to me." Per looked genuinely surprised. He said, "No, I just don't talk much. That's not because I don't like you. It's just how I am. Danes don't fill silence with small talk as much." Emma felt bad. She realized she'd been measuring friendship by how many words got exchanged. But Per was perfectly friendly. He just didn't need constant conversation to feel connected. Then she noticed something. When she stopped trying so hard to fill every silence, conversations with Per actually got deeper. Because he knew she wasn't just being chatty to be chatty. She was saying things that actually mattered. There's also the story of my friend Tom, who was visiting Switzerland and went to a cafe to work. He was sitting at a table, and an older Swiss woman was sitting at the next table. They made eye contact for a second. Then she looked away. Tom thought, "Oh no, she thinks I'm weird. She's annoyed I'm here." But she just went back to reading her newspaper. She wasn't annoyed. She was just existing in her own space. Tom couldn't help himself, though. He tried to start a conversation about the cafe, the weather, anything. The woman gave one-word answers. Tom kept trying. Eventually, she just put in earbuds. Later, the cafe manager told Tom, "You know, Swiss people like quiet." She was probably enjoying the silence. "You made it awkward by forcing conversation." This is such an important cultural thing that Americans miss. In the US, we've been taught that ignoring someone is rude. If you see someone, you should acknowledge them. If there's a moment of silence, someone should fill it. Sitting next to someone without talking feels wrong to us. But in many European countries, sitting quietly near someone is completely normal. You're coexisting peacefully. You're not required to acknowledge or entertain each other. My colleague Janet experienced this in a really specific way. She was in a training session in Amsterdam. The trainer asked the room, "Does anyone have experience with this software?" Nobody raised their hand. The trainer waited 5 seconds. Janet got nervous because in American meetings, someone always jumps in. That silence felt like everyone was lost. So Janet raised her hand and said, "I'm not sure, but I'm willing to learn." She was trying to break the ice, to show engagement. The trainer said, "That's not what I asked. Do you have experience with it or not?" Turns out everyone understood the question. They either had experience or they didn't. The Dutch don't do the whole dance of, "I'm not an expert, but," or "I might be wrong, but." You have it or you don't. Silence means nobody has it. Not that nobody is willing to speak up. Janet learned that in Dutch communication, directness is valued. Filling silence with uncertain rambling is actually seen as less honest than just being quiet. There's also Ryan's story from his semester in Sweden. He was in a class, and the professor asked a question about their reading. For genuinely 45 seconds, Nothing happened. Students were thinking. No one even looked uncomfortable. Ryan, though, he started fidgeting because he couldn't handle it. After about 30 seconds, he raised his hand, even though he wasn't fully sure of his answer. He just needed to break the silence. His Swedish classmates all looked at him like he'd interrupted something important, which he had. He'd interrupted their thinking time. When he finally sat down, his classmate Maya told him, "In Sweden, we believe that if you haven't thought about it enough, you shouldn't speak. Rushing an answer is worse than waiting for a good one." Ryan said, "But what if you're still thinking when the professor moves on?" And Maya's response was perfect. She said, "Then you think about it more after class. You don't need to share every thought as it happens." This completely changed how Ryan participated for the rest of the semester. He stopped seeing silence as something to fix. He started seeing it as valuable thinking space. The last story from this section is about my friend Chris, who moved to Finland. He went to his first day at work, and honestly, he said it was kind of depressing. People were quiet. They focused on their work. During lunch, people didn't really mingle. Chris thought Finnish people were cold or unhappy, or didn't like the job. But then his manager, a Finnish woman named Liisa, pulled him aside and asked how he was doing. They had a deep, meaningful conversation. Lisa asked good questions. She actually listened. Chris realized that Finns aren't quiet because they're unfriendly. They're quiet because they only speak when they have something worth saying. When they do talk, they mean it. After that, Chris stopped trying to fill every moment with chatter at work. And ironically, he made closer friends with his Finnish colleagues than he ever had with chatty co-workers in America. Let me shift gears a bit, because the silence thing connects to bigger issues with how Americans read politeness in other cultures. My friend Lisa was an au pair in France. On her first day, the family picked her up from the airport. Nobody asked her tons of questions about her flight. Nobody asked if she was hungry or tired. They kind of just brought her to the apartment and said dinner would be at 7 p.m. Lisa thought they were being cold. She thought they didn't care about her comfort. In her mind, a welcoming American family would ask endless questions, make sure she was settled, offer snacks and drinks. But this French family was being welcoming in their own way. They were giving her space to settle in without fussing. They had a structured plan for dinner, which meant they were including her in the family routine. At dinner, the conversation was about current events, philosophy, interesting ideas. Nobody asked Lisa personal questions. Nobody tried to get her to talk about herself. Lisa felt like they were ignoring her. She tried to share stories about her life, but the family would listen politely and then go back to their intellectual discussion. Only after a few weeks did Lisa understand that in French culture, immediately prying into someone's personal life is actually considered invasive. They were respecting her privacy, and bringing up intellectual topics was a way of treating her as an equal, not as a guest to entertain. The family wasn't cold. They were just expressing warmth differently than Lisa expected. Then there's the story of my neighbor Ahmed, who's from Egypt, but lived in Germany for 5 years. He invited his German colleague Klaus over for dinner. Ahmed made a huge meal. Appetizers, main course, dessert. Lots of food. Too much food. When Klaus arrived, he was very polite. He said the food looked nice. He ate some. He had seconds. But he didn't rave about it. He didn't compliment Ahmed's cooking the way Ahmed expected. Ahmed felt hurt. He'd spent hours cooking, and Klaus seemed unimpressed. After Klaus left, Ahmed called me and said, "I don't think he enjoyed it." But I told him, Klaus was probably being respectful by not gushing. In German culture, going too overboard with compliments can seem insincere or over the top. Ahmed said, "So, how do I know if he actually liked it?" And I said, "He ate it. He came to your house." That's the compliment. This is such a big one for Americans. We express enthusiasm with volume. We're loud about our joy. "Oh my gosh, this is amazing! You're such a good cook. This is the best thing I've ever eaten." We turn it up. Other cultures, though, especially in Northern Europe and parts of Asia, see that kind of exuberance as not quite genuine. It's seen as a little bit performative. My friend Nicole experienced this when she lived in Tokyo. She was visiting her boyfriend's family for dinner. His mother made sushi from scratch. Nicole, being American, went full enthusiasm mode. "This is incredible. You're so talented. I've never tasted sushi this good. You should be a sushi chef." Her boyfriend's mother seemed uncomfortable. She kept saying, No, very simple. Not special." Nicole thought she was being modest, so she kept complimenting her. Later, Nicole's boyfriend told her that in Japan, the over-the-top compliments made his mother think Nicole was being sarcastic or making fun of her. Japanese people tend to downplay their accomplishments, and they expect guests to also be more measured in their praise. Nicole should have said something like, "Thank you for making this. It's delicious." Simple. Sincere. Not overwhelming. Here's another one. My friend Garrett was teaching in Poland. After a class, one of his Polish students came up to him and said, "That lesson was confusing." Garrett's first instinct was to get defensive. He thought the student was criticizing him or blaming him for being a bad teacher. His American instinct was to either defend himself or make a joke to lighten the mood. But the student wasn't being mean. He was being honest. In Polish culture, that directness is actually a sign of respect. The student thought enough of Garrett's teaching to give him honest feedback, not flattery. Garrett eventually learned that Polish communication style is much more direct than American. What sounds rude to an American ear is just normal honesty to a Polish person. There's also the story of my friend Priya, who's Indian but worked in Stockholm. She brought homemade Indian food to share at work. Her Swedish co-workers tried it and said, "Interesting. Thank you for bringing it." That was it. Interesting, not delicious. Not amazing. Interesting. Priya felt insulted until her manager explained that Swedes don't usually rave about food the way Americans do. They eat it. They appreciate it being different and trying something new. Interesting was actually a compliment. But Priya, coming from an Indian background where food is a huge expression of love and hospitality, interpreted interesting as, "I'm being polite, but I didn't like it." It took time for her to realize that Swedish co-workers' quieter appreciation wasn't a rejection. It was just a different expression of gratitude. Then there's the awkward moment my friend Brian had in Vienna. He was at a dinner party, and the host kept serving him food. Brian's from Texas, and he was raised to always be a good guest. So he kept accepting food and compliments and basically just being super engaged and enthusiastic and American about everything. The host seemed to get increasingly tired. Less smiley, more formal. Later, Brian's Austrian friend told him that in Austria, you're actually supposed to show restraint as a guest. You don't accept everything offered. You don't go overboard with enthusiasm. You're gracious, but measured. The host kept offering food because that's what Austrian hosts do. But Brian kept accepting because he wanted to be polite and show gratitude. The host thought Brian had no self-control and just wanted to eat all the food. It was a misunderstanding based on two different ideas of what politeness looks like. There's also the story of my co-worker Michelle, who did business in South Korea. In meetings with Korean colleagues, there was a lot of silence. Michelle thought it meant they disagreed or didn't understand. But her Korean mentor told her that Korean business culture involves lots of listening and thinking before speaking. It's not that they disagree, it's that they're processing information carefully. Michelle also noticed that Korean colleagues would often say yes or I understand without actually committing to something. She thought they were agreeing to her proposals, but later they'd take different approaches. It turned out that I understand in Korean business culture means I heard what you said, not I agree with you. They were being polite by confirming they heard her. But Michelle kept misinterpreting it as agreement. The last story here is about my friend Josh, who was an exchange student in Belgium. He made friends with a Belgian named Vincent. They hung out, they talked. Everything seemed great. Then Josh went home for 2 weeks, and Vincent didn't text him much. Josh thought Vincent had gotten mad at him or didn't want to be friends anymore. When Josh got back to Belgium, he immediately reached out with a big explanation about how he'd been thinking about Vincent the whole time he was away. Vincent looked confused. He said, "I know you were home. You were visiting family. I didn't expect to hear from you constantly." Josh realized that in Belgian culture, friendships don't need constant contact or reassurance. You can go weeks without talking and still be close friends. The friendship exists independent of constant communication. Josh, being American, had internalized the idea that you have to keep in touch to maintain friendships. Silence or distance got read by him as a sign the friendship was fading. But Vincent's quieter approach to friendship wasn't less genuine. It was just less needy. Now let's talk about the workplace, because that's where these misunderstandings can really cause problems. My friend Derek was working for a German company. In his American job, if you had a problem, you'd go to your manager, chat about it casually, maybe grab coffee, and work it out together. It was relationship-focused. Derek tried the same approach with his German manager. He'd go into her office, close the door, try to build rapport. His manager would seem annoyed. Eventually, she told him, "If you have a work issue, put it in an email. State the problem and the solution you're proposing. Then we can discuss." Derek thought she was being cold, but really, she was being professional. In German business culture, mixing personal chat with business discussion is seen as unprofessional. She wanted efficiency and clear communication. Derek kept trying his American approach, though. He'd go into her office with casual conversation first. His manager would keep pulling the conversation back to the specific issue. It took Derek months to realize that what felt cold to him was actually respect for her time and clarity. She wasn't rejecting him as a person. She was keeping work separate from personal relationships. Then there's the story of my friend Leah, who got a job in Belgium. In her first performance review, her manager told her, "You did fine work. Some things went well, some things didn't. Here are the areas where you need improvement." That was it. No extra praise. No, "You're such a great team member." No softening of the criticism. Leah felt like her manager hated her work. She was upset about the review. She emailed another American who'd worked there and asked, "Is my manager always this harsh?" The American said, "That's actually a really positive review by Belgian standards. They only mention problems if they're serious. If your manager took time to give you suggestions for improvement, that means they think you're worth developing." Leah had been reading her manager's directness as meanness, but her manager was actually being invested in Leah's growth. There's also the thing my friend Paul noticed working in the Netherlands. In American workplaces, there's usually a hierarchy. You respect your boss. You follow their lead. They make big decisions. But at Paul's Dutch company, things were different. Employees felt free to disagree with the boss. They'd question decisions. They wouldn't just accept things because the manager said so. Paul thought it was disrespectful. But his Dutch co-workers explained that they're showing respect by taking the company's decisions seriously. They're willing to debate and think critically because they care about getting things right, not because they don't respect the hierarchy. The boss wasn't threatened by the disagreement. The boss expected it. Paul kept waiting for there to be some huge conflict, but there wasn't. The Dutch would debate, make a decision together, and move on. Now there's the more complicated story of my friend Tamara, who worked in a tech startup in Israel. She came from an American startup background where there's lots of energy, positivity, big dreams. Her Israeli co-workers were more cynical. They'd poke holes in every idea. They'd argue about plans. They'd say things like, "That won't work because of X," or "That's impossible because of Y." Tamara thought her Israeli team was being negative and undermining the vision. But her Israeli mentor told her, We're not being negative. We're being realistic. We argue because we're engaged. We point out problems because we want to find solutions. Israelis tend to communicate in a very direct, sometimes blunt way. But it's not personal. It's just how they operate. Tamara had to learn that silence or agreement in Israeli culture would actually mean people weren't invested. They're quiet if they don't care. There's also the story of my colleague Farah, who's from Lebanon but worked in Dubai with a lot of international staff. She noticed that her Indian colleague Vic was very quiet in meetings. He'd barely speak. Farah thought Vic was disengaged or struggling with the work. She tried to get him to participate more, but Vic explained that in Indian workplaces, especially in more traditional companies, there's more hierarchy. Junior staff aren't expected to jump into conversations. They listen and learn first. Vic wasn't struggling. He was being respectful of the hierarchy. He'd contribute when he felt it was appropriate or when directly asked. Farah realized she'd been judging Vic's quietness through her Lebanese communication style, where everyone tends to be more vocal. Then there's my friend Marcus, different Marcus from earlier, who worked in Japan. He noticed that in meetings, his Japanese colleagues would often say, "We will consider it," which Marcus interpreted as, "Yes, we're going to do it." But "we will consider it" in Japanese business speak often actually means "probably not, but we're being polite." Or sometimes it means "we need to talk about it more internally first." Marcus would go back to his American boss, saying, "They agreed to the deal," and then the Japanese team would take months to decide. It created a lot of miscommunication. Because Marcus was reading the surface level, words without understanding, the cultural layer underneath. My friend Sophia had a similar experience in Thailand. Her Thai boss was always very friendly and smiled a lot. Sophia thought her boss loved her and that everything was going great. Then she got fired for being late to work a few times. Sophia was shocked. She thought her boss loved her because she was always so warm and smiley. Her Thai friend explained that in Thai culture, people are often very warm and pleasant on the surface. It's about maintaining harmony and not causing embarrassment. But underneath, there are clear expectations about professionalism and punctuality. Sophia's boss was kind and warm, but that didn't mean professionalism didn't matter. Sophia had misread Thai warmth as acceptance of her behavior. Finally, there's the story of my friend Connor, who worked in a call center in India. He noticed that his Indian colleagues would frequently say, "No problem," or "Sure, that's fine," to requests from customers, even when something clearly wasn't possible. Connor thought they were being dishonest or not paying attention, but his Indian manager explained that, "Sure, we'll try," is a way of showing willingness to help and maintain a positive relationship. Indians tend to avoid saying no directly, because it can feel harsh or create conflict. This doesn't mean they'll actually do impossible things. It means they're showing goodwill first, and then they'll figure out what's actually feasible. Connor had been reading directness into Indian communication when there was actually a lot more relational focus underneath. So here's the thing. Americans grow up in a culture where we think talking is how you show you care. We think engagement means volume. We think silence means rejection. But across the world, in Europe, Asia, everywhere really, silence means something totally different. It means thinking. It means respect. It means people are processing. It means they're giving you space. I think this happens because American culture, especially business culture, really values quick answers and constant engagement. We're taught that the person who talks most wins. We're taught that hesitation means weakness. And in a lot of American settings, that's actually true. In sales, in marketing, in entertainment, being loud and fast-talking can actually get you ahead. But once you step outside the United States, that skill becomes a liability. The louder you are, the less people listen. The more you talk to fill silence, the less anyone wants to hear from you. My friend David, from the London meeting story, he finally got it after working abroad for about a year. He told me, Americans think silence is an empty space, but everywhere else, silence is a full thought. I think that's perfect. Silence isn't empty. It's full of thinking and processing and respect. There's this other thing too. Americans are very focused on making sure everyone likes us. We go overboard with compliments and enthusiasm. We ask lots of personal questions. We're very warm on the surface, but a lot of cultures see that as fake or not genuine. They see it as trying too hard. The quieter, more measured approach in other countries isn't cold. It's actually more honest. People mean what they say. They don't say things just to be nice. And honestly, once you get used to it, you realize that's a lot less exhausting. You don't have to be on all the time. You can just exist without having to perform cheerfulness constantly. My friend Emma from Copenhagen, she said, after living in Denmark for 5 years, I used to think Danish people were cold. Now I realize they're just honest. They don't pretend to be your best friend after 2 weeks. But once they actually like you, it's real. The crazy part is how often Americans take this personally. We think someone doesn't like us when they're just being normal for their culture. We think we've failed when we've just misunderstood the communication style. I've done it 100 times. I've panicked in a quiet room. I've felt rejected by measured responses. I've thought I was doing something wrong when I was just operating with different cultural expectations. And what I've learned is that silence isn't rejection. Quietness isn't coldness. Measured responses aren't disinterest. It's just a different language. And once you learn it, things make a lot more sense. The irony is that Americans go all over the world trying to teach people our way of doing things. We think if people would just be more enthusiastic and talkative and engage more, everything would be better. But maybe we're the ones who need to learn. Maybe we should spend some time sitting with the quiet. Maybe we should stop filling every silence with our own voice. Maybe then we'd actually hear what other people are trying